Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. As many of you know, we have very few near-death experiencers as Seek Reality guests, and there's a reason for that. Near-death experiencers are generally overwhelmed by their near-death experiences. Near-death experiences are usually spontaneous, out-of-body travel in the astral plane, and it's usually when, for one reason or another, the material body is briefly unable to support life. And, when that happens, there you are suddenly in the astral plane, and that experience is so overwhelming that we're sure we must have actually died. Oh my God, oh my God. And then to top it off, our spiritual guide will often give us weird and amazing experiences that are educational, and they're meant for us alone. And sometimes they include things like a trip to a fiery hell that's meant to shape us up. And then, of course, we come right back into our body and we wake up. So what can we assume but that we actually died and we came back to life? But in fact, such a round trip is impossible. The literal definition of death is the severing of the energy cord from your energy body, which is what has just made that trip, to your material body that keeps and that cord is what keeps your material body alive when you astral travel, which in fact most of us do, and we do it nearly every night while our material bodies sleep. They need to sleep. Our energy bodies don't have to sleep. That silver cord cannot be reattached. So if someone is here and they're able to tell you the story of that amazing trip, that person never has actually died and never has been to where the dead actually are, not even for a moment. All of that being said, near-death experiences can be amazing, and many of them are life-transforming. And our guest today had his transformative NDE when he was only 3 years old. Jacob Cooper is with us today for the third time. His first book, Life After Breath, begins with his remarkable near-death experience at the age of only 3. And his second book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, talks about his further extraordinary spiritual experiences and what he has learned from them. Jacob Cooper is still a young man, and he's been through a lot for someone so young. But we know that the veil between worlds is thinning rapidly now, and those who are willing to open themselves to grow spiritually are learning so much. Jacob, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you back with us today.
Roberta, a big honor. This has been a wonderful week. I just was on the George Noory show this week, and just yesterday I spoke with the man that coined the term NDE, my friend Dr. Raymond Moody, for a bit, over the phone, and I was giving him, and you and others a lot of credit for, the term NDE, but he said, no, it goes beyond me. It's about, Plato was the one, and he's just so modest and humble and brilliant too. And I'm honored to call him and you as a friend, the many pioneering researchers of NDE and transformative experiences. And without you, I don't know if I would be here today. I guess not. You've paved the way, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I tried to have Raymond Moody on as a guest a while back, and I found him so overwhelming. It was hard to get a word in edgewise. He's so sort of overwhelmed by his whole life, I think. But I found him. I was a dinner guest with him, not his guest. He and I were guests together, and I found him to be the most fascinating guy to just talk to. He's overwhelmed with joy. He's a wonderful guy.
That's anyone that talks to him will really vouch for how brilliant obviously he is, but his heart, is pure gold, and he's clearly a man who's made an incredible impact, but just very modest about it. And, he just, I think in a way he has the public persona, but he just wants to be a guy too, I think. He just wants to just be talked to as a person. He's not of the ego, he's of the heart,
Yeah, he is. He
definitely.
really is delightful. He had me
Yeah.
laughing, I have to tell you.
No. Yeah. But an honor to be back here on the show. Um, yeah, no, I've been very busy trying to shift gears. I've developed a YouTube channel called The Wisdom Jacob's Ladder. And so that's really about generating the inspiration, the hope past some people when they are going through pain. But now my focus is really tied into my NDE and really getting to know the brain and understand the brain and how to utilize all parts of our toolbox in this life, to really enhance our experiences. So that's been my real focus the last, recent couple of weeks.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad you're just not letting any grass grow. You're doing things all the time, and you have a day job. You're counseling people, right?
Yeah, no, I work in one of the biggest hospital conglomerates, probably the biggest hospital conglomerates in the United States, in a psychiatric hospital facility, and so I work for many years, in outpatient, care, and I also do private practice. So, I think, and I'm sure you could agree with this, in life, I think there's two roads we could take. We could think that life is for me, or life is about really the ripple effect and really connecting to others and giving to others. And so many people try to search for God and try to find God, and others just help out others and recognize that that's the God realization, is just giving and enriching someone's life. And that's to me the embodiment, the personification of the divine, if you will, the giver of life, when people experience absence of it. And certainly I myself have had this transformative experience and I could easily just hold on to it, but I try to give back that insight every day in any way that I could from the ground up to others.
Well, talk a little bit about what it was like to have a near-death experience as a small child. How did it affect you when you were so young?
Yeah. Well, my curiosity is like for people who have grown up without near-death experiences, like what's life like with that one? For me, that's all I know in
Right,
this life,
right.
but life was, you know, there was a double-edged sword to my life. On one hand, there was a great insight that I had, that probably a lot of children have when they're younger because you think about it, you're just coming back from the other side to this reality. But for me, it was a lot more full-blown. And so I had to implore a lot of what I utilize with my clients today, which is something called radical acceptance. And this is something that people do in grief or in loss. It doesn't mean that we agree with the way things are, but it does mean that we need to acknowledge and accept that these are the way that things are. And for me, coming back from an NDE, I had to relearn, that I was to experience myself at 3 years old. I understood that I was not a 3-year-old. My soul is not three, but I was experiencing myself in it. So I had to just kind of accept myself as a kid in this life and be present, in this life, and but then eventually once I was able to be free and the shackles kind of came away, I was able to embrace that part of myself and just say this is who I am. And I wish that for everyone. At a certain point we develop an ego, at a very young age where we have like a set characteristics of who we are with that box in this lifetime. And, some parts of our life we recognize that we are not all those traits. We experience those characteristics of our jobs, our genders, our ages, but beyond that is an infinite soul. And, that's when people are able to remember that they're having they are spiritual beings, having this human experience. And that's a beautiful realization.
And you had some sense of that even though you were so young.
Absolutely. I mean, I lived in a home where I had, 4 or 5 siblings, and there's always a black sheep of the family, someone who's very different. We all had the same food, the same clothes, the same this, but I was by far the biggest outlier, hands down.
You
And
were the
just,
black sheep of the
and
family. I
just, and
love it.
just, you just have to, for me, as a therapist, what keeps me going is to know the why. Like, why did things happen? Why was I like that? And, to me, I think the near-death experience, sparked a lot of resistance against the way that things were. It's hard for me to accept myself as a kid still. It was hard for me to accept that, I was just this small child and the world was seeing me this way. There was a part of me that knew that I was this old soul, but I had to learn again how to accept. It doesn't mean that I agree with it, but it does mean that I had to accept the way things are. And I found within my practice with my clients, the most successful people of this reality to me are the most adaptable. They're most flexible with situations. And eventually once they're able to get through that, they have a little bit more autonomy at a certain point in their life to really make life more their own. But sometimes things are the way that they are, and it doesn't mean we agree with it, but to kind of move forward, we have to find ways to be flexible with our attitudes and our approaches towards things.
I can understand how that would be the case, because if you had an experience of a larger reality and a larger you, it would be hard to sort of squash yourself back into the way people would see you as a small child. I can see that would be the case.
Yeah, well, it was kind of paradoxical, where all of a sudden the people that I saw as old were kind of young, and the people that I saw were young were old, meaning chronologically they were older, but they had more forgetfulness. They didn't have as much clarity, and they were just kind of blinded to this stuff, where the younger people were spiritually older in a sense. But that to me speaks volumes about the way that the world is operated. We're taught to just kind of bog down that inner voice and kind of be influenced by this larger voice of influence on the external world and the outer kind of programming. And so many people are just leaves and waters to this consciousness of this world that we are experiencing, versus tapping into the unique components of who they are. And that leads to midlife crisis. A lot of people check off all the boxes of what they were supposed to be in this life and they feel empty. Because I think a lot of that has to do with a very disconnected sense of inner self, and that's been going on for a long time, and a life that's not connected from the right foundation.
Because they lived off the end of that material life that they had assumed was going to be their lives.
Right.
And suddenly they're the spiritual aspect.
They fell into the cultural myth. They bought into it.
Yes,
and
exactly. Yes, better
they thought
said.
that was real. And I see this every day. When people are just kind of buying off of what the world wants you to be instead of being your authentic, real self and living a connected life. And so, I've gathered, so many things that people are seeking, they're facing the wrong way. When you're looking for all these kind of things outside yourself, you may not find it, but when you're facing inward, you'll find a lot more beauty and be able to transform those external experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. And you had a spontaneous OBE as well?
My out-of-body experience was something that happened probably 2 decades later. And again, it was in the month of September, which I'm a big Earth, Wind, and Fire guy, but my Lord, that is my month. From having my NDE,
Right,
I
right.
definitely remember in September, so
Yeah. For me,
um,
it's April, but I think we all have a month like that. Right.
there's just there's synchronicities to it. But yeah, April, yeah, that's definitely. I mean, I'm
Everybody
born in
has one month.
April.
Yours is September. I don't question it because I know what you mean.
April's my month too, but it really does speak to the NDE in a way where it's like, there's, I guess at least my philosophy, there's a bit of a new beginning and a letting go of an old reality, and a birth from,
Yes. Oh, yes.
decay, if you will. So there's, to me, it represents the eternal cycle of life, the seasons and nature itself. But
Yes.
September, at least for me, is different because and I know we always speak about this, but I come from the Jewish tradition. September represents, the beginning of the new year, a new chapter, a
Yes.
new cycle. So, I've been a very good Jew without even trying with all these experiences, and I don't have to follow
Yeah.
all the dogma and the rules. It just kind of happened to me, you know. But to me, September was when I had my OBE in my early college years, where literally just kind of woke up and I was just outside of my body, hovering over it. And this didn't last an hour, it didn't last a day, it lasted a couple of weeks, and it was the most beautiful, euphoric experience. And it left any bit of doubt that I had. I could have said to myself, "Hey, I was a kid, I was this, I was that," but this was when I was a full adult, and I can't tell you how beautiful it was. I was just able to tap into all of this beauty and love and expansive energy that was inside my inner being that laid, maybe dormant for years, and it was this energetic explosion. But to me, it was really it started by laughing hysterically, and when I laughed, I was able to squeeze out every part of my body, and I was laughing at the cultural myth that how we just took all these things so seriously that were so meaningless, that were so little of substance. And from looking at all this world that I just kind of bought into for a period of time and just looking it straight in the face, I just was cracking up and I was seeing past this illusion.
Are you
And
serious? That's amazing.
and it wasn't just a ha ha laughter. This was a laughter where every part of my body was just squeezing out all of the heaviness. And literally, I left my body for several weeks from laughter, you know.
Is that in the
And
book? Because I don't recall reading that, and I read that book.
yeah, you know, it it's something that I certainly emphasize in my teaching. There's a group called the Laughing Club of India, and there's a documentary on it, that I've watched for years. And literally, there are people living in India, in a third world country, and they have very little material, substance, in life, but they meet every day and they generate their own happiness. They recognize that happiness is the state of the soul, is the state of our inner being, and they just crack up hysterically for a couple minutes every day. But they have
Oh
the
my
most
God.
power because they are able to take life in their own hands. They don't need something to make them happy. They're not dependent on external. They decide and choose their own happiness. And for me, that's what led to this. I could really, if you could kind of pinpoint one thing, that's kind of like the squeezing out and just the hysterical laughter of this reality and looking at the myth of it dead in the face and just how like much tension I build up to things that just don't matter,
I
how
love that.
seriousness we take to these things that are just a joke. So it's the grand comedy that stirred up my spirit, and I was able to really see things for what was real versus things that I perceived to be real. But this experience, my heart it felt like wet like an ocean. It was just beaming with this. It felt like
Oh,
an
Janet, I
ocean.
just love that. I love that.
I literally had to take a towel and try to dry off my third eye and my heart because I thought it was soaking wet. But it was
I
just,
just love that so
and
much.
literally I would just sit and I would feel this blinking eye. And I felt my third eye before on and off, but this was a literal massive eyeball that was
I love it
blinking
so much.
on and off. And I was like, what is this, like a psychotic episode? Is this a manic phase? No, this was just myself taking away all these shackles of tension or stress or anxiety and just being fully free and unencumbered. And it was, I wish I could have, and this is why I do what I do because I don't want to hold on to these things. I want people to experience what I had and just how beautiful life really is when you take away all the other barriers of what we
You were just
identify life
laughing out
as.
of pure joy. I just love that so much.
Hysterical laughing, like hysterical, where it wasn't just, most people when they laugh, it's just from kind of like the neck up. It's not from a full body laughter, where when you really laugh, you squeeze out all of the organs in your body and all of the stagnant energy.
Yeah,
And it could be a great liberating factor. And you just recognize how tight we mostly are. Majority of
yeah,
people are very stuck in their left brains. They're not really in their full being. They're really just kind of stuck in their heads, if you will. So when
yes,
you're able
totally.
to
I totally,
just,
totally get it because I've had this experience too, and I thought I
it's
was going
it's
mad.
not just you, Roberta. I know, and some will refer to it as Kundalini experience, but that has like a lot of yoga to kind of. I just think it's just an explosion of your inner being showcasing and shining itself when it may have been dormant or bogged down or minimized in this life through the world taking over your soul instead of your soul taking over the world.
It when you go mad with joy, I know that and exactly how that feels.
I didn't light up any Timothy Leary stuff either.
No, no, no.
No, nothing like
You
that.
just go mad with joy because this world is so temporary and so precious. it's just so little compared to what really is true.
Right. Yeah. And I know now everyone wants. I can understand, for a lot of people, they want to experiment with hallucinogenics, LSD
But
or
they don't need
DMT.
them because what's true is so much better than that.
Yeah,
That's
and
wonderful.
you don't risk your life. I mean, all this stuff
Oh,
could be very dangerous. I, as a therapist, I could see why someone would experiment this if you tried everything and if you're just at your last stop of the train. I know Netflix had a documentary on it called like The Last Shaman, of someone who was like basically suicidal, and he experimented with this stuff. And for some, it could really be impactful. For a lot of people, it could lead to death or, just disease or just a
you
lot
don't
of
even need
psychotic
that.
episodes.
That's what
No,
you discovered. You don't even need it. That's
no,
the thing.
because that's a tool, but you have all that inside of you.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
yes,
the new age has been kind of cultish. It's almost like religion, where people associate the tools with synonymous of spirituality, like burning incense or chanting or doing all these kind of same 5 or 6 things that everyone does not make you spiritual. These are tools of
yes.
expansion, but they themselves are just tools, and so I think people need to get back to that they have all this inside of themselves, and to differentiate the tools that they use versus who they are as truly spiritual beings. Is you don't need to have all these tools to identify yourself as spiritual. Those are tools, but they're not of itself spiritual.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so happy for you, Jacob. That
Yeah,
is wonderful.
it's funny that people run away from religions, but the New Age has become almost like a religion. It's just like you do like these 5 or 6 things, and it's all kind of the same. But you need to be able to disattach from it and recognize that these are just means to an end. But who we are and the lives that we live in our essence is the most spiritual thing that we can do.
Yes, yes,
So
totally, totally true. Oh,
going
I'm
to a
so
yoga
happy.
class or all this stuff does not make you spiritual. It could be a tool for it, but you don't need a yoga voice to call yourself spiritual.
So did you learn to go within with at will?
With time, yeah. I mean, I've used a lot of tools of exploration, and to me, they're all just really able to get back to that expansive self. But for me, at least, what works is elements. I've found that going from within, I've been able to really feel my own elements. I believe we all have elements of earth, air, fire, water, and ether. And some souls have more of a dominant expression, of energies. Some have more earth energy, they're more grounded. Some are more air, they're more intellectualized or expressive. Some have water, they're more dominant in their fluidity and emotional expression. Some are fire, they're more initiative, and they like to take charge and lead. And I think we all have parts of that within, our soul's personality and energy. But I think what's important is to kind of learn how to feel those elements and to learn how to channel. And so from going from within, and my OBE really helped me feel those elements that we have at our core. I was able to feel fire, water, air, all these things. So, in the English language, we say, oh, that person is hot-headed or that person is cool-headed. Why do we decide those words? Where does that come from? And to me, that means when someone's hot-headed, it literally means that the fire energy is really overtaking, their head. But someone's cool-headed, they're able to really balance and they're able to keep a lot of the fire in the belly and, a cool-headedness. So it really has to do with learning how to balance your energies on the inside of yourself. And if you're able to do that, it's like, wow, life has a whole new gear. But most people are very imbalanced. Most people are very, what's called fire up, water down. You want to be water up
Right,
and fire down.
right. Well, I've learned to have these experiences by myself because my family doesn't understand it, and they don't need to. So I just have them with my guides, and we're happy together. We have a whole separate life, but I know exactly what you went through. It makes me happy just
You,
thinking
you
about it.
have to be very careful with who you decide to talk about these things because
Right.
others could really, with their own judgments, or their own misunderstandings, could really, invalidate, your experiences. And then you'll just kind of feel shame or just kind of down about it. But that has more to do with other people's relationship with the unknown.
That's
Um,
right. That's right. So I just don't talk about it, but except to the world, but I don't talk about it to my family because
but
they accept me, but they have their own lives. But nonetheless, that's wonderful. And you've said you have a male and a female guide that you have relationships with too, and I have a male and a female guide that I'm close to as well, especially. But I know I have a bunch of others I don't know them personally.
yeah, no, it's beautiful to have a relationship with all of these superpowers within. And that's a chapter in my book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, like your inner superpowers. I think we have, as a culture, a real obsession, to some degree, at least the younger generation with Marvel characters and Spider-Man and Superman,
Right,
all
I
that
know.
stuff. And we just have to recognize, why are we so obsessed with that? And I think really the things that we're aspiring to or looking at and seeing greatness in is really a reflection of our higher selves and what we have within ourselves. And so I think rather than seeing beauty or strength, solely outside of someone else, we should see that as a reflection in ourselves. And for me, at least, when I see a great teacher, someone who's influenced my life, I don't just put that person on a pedestal. I say, that's me. That part of that person is myself, much like a beautiful mountain or nature. That
Right, of
beauty that we
course.
see is just a reflection of our inner beauty, our inner self, and that's why we gravitate to these things. But people ask me all the time about spirit guides, and even George Noory asked me when I was on Coast to Coast this week about it, and I could agree. I think before you get to this life, I don't believe I've had a direct awareness of the life review phase, that before we get here, really plan out our lives. And that is really mostly decided with our primary guides that we're contracted before we come here. It's
Right.
mutual agreement, and
Uh-huh.
it's that guide and ourselves are agreed to each other. But within life, we could also, tag on other guides. But when I saw my spirit guides in my, NDE, I can't tell you just how euphoric it was, how beautiful they were, but also at the same time, just how elevated I feel. It felt like, if you ever have like someone, let's say that you have an infatuation for, just a big crush on, you
Yes,
know,
I know exactly how that
and you
is.
feel
Yes.
this person is totally out of your league, that they will never be into you, that they're just on this other pedestal, and that person feels the same way as you do. It's kind of that's kind of how I felt with my guides. It's like, oh my God, like you guys are just, I can't express how beautiful you are, and you are so invested in me. And it was,
Yes.
yes, we
Isn't
are.
amazing, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, we are. And, because sometimes, again, that's the ego. We see ourselves in a very small way, but spirit guides see us through our real, true, higher selves and our true nature. And that's what they see ourselves as, and they see ourselves in such an elevated way. But that's the closest way I could describe it. Just like a Hollywood celebrity crush that you have that you think is an ivory tower all of a sudden feels the same way as you do. And you're like, oh my Lord, and you've been with me the whole time, and you're totally invested in me. It's just, you can't explain how beautiful that is.
It's extraordinary that they love us and, in a sense, revere us and they're devoted our whole lives
Yeah.
to our benefit. And that's amazing to discover that when you're right, when we look up to them so much.
But
I I
they
can't
look up to us too,
I know, well, that's what I mean. It's so extraordinary.
It's
I
it's
can't get over it myself
it's a
still.
it's a topsy-turvy world over there,
Yeah,
just, and how we are just so different over there than how we see ourselves over here many times.
right.
I
That's
can't tell
right,
you how small the majority of people see themselves versus the
right.
reflection of the true reality. I can't tell you. And some
I
people
know.
have that expansion, and people gravitate to that. I look at, yeah, at least for me, like the the most influential teachers in my life have probably been Ram Dass and Wayne Dyer, and I think those people are just they're on this earth, but not of it. They're connected to a really higher source, and they're just kind of like expansive in their connection to their inner selves. It's not a very small connection. It's a larger, broader connection. They're really they were lived a conduit life, of just a real reflection of a deep spiritual being having these human experiences.
But that's a point that you've just made, I think needs to be emphasized, because my Thomas, who is my primary guide, says it to me all the time. He tells me that I am every bit as elevated as he is, and that when I get there, after I have transitioned, I will discover that. I am overwhelmed by that thought. I cannot imagine it. But he tells me that. And everybody listening is in that same position. You have wonderful, powerful, beautiful guides, but they would tell you the same thing, that you are every bit as elevated as they are.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think we kind of, at least in the Western world, we kind of like apply capitalism or just how we're structured, in hierarchy, and we associate it with spirituality, that there are the haves and the have-nots, and there's those with monopolization of this stuff and those that don't. But, there's enough abundance of the pie for everyone to enjoy and eat. It's not something for a select few. And so sometimes you just kind of like associate material wealth and how some people have a lot of it and some people don't, and we just feel degraded and just say, oh, that's for the 1%. But no, we all have abundance. We all have expansiveness, and it's not just for a select few. It is innately our reflection of who we all are. The difference is that some people remember that, they expand on it, but at the end of the day, you burn all the other stuff away. That's all that's left of every being.
When I say at the end of each of these broadcasts that you are a beautiful, powerful being, I really mean that's really true. I'm not just trying to stroke you. You are really, really that wonderful. You just don't know that right now. And you will know that when you have transitioned, you will know that. So try to live up to who you really are.
I think also we could really have a knowing of that in this life too. There's some droplets of that we could experience in our reality. And, certainly these transformative experiences, could accelerate that awareness. But, I think you can have, or you don't need to have these experiences to remember who you are. I think really it's just finding deeper ways to connect to the divine spark within. We all have it. And I think really we just have to expand it. And that's kind of in the podcast, I started speaking about the brain a little bit, because at least for me, the last part that led to my NDE was my brain, suffocating due to deprivation of oxygen. And that's when I felt my brain literally crack open or snap in half. And that's when God in the spirit realm, came in. And for me, I've just been on a fascinating journey to understand, okay, our brains are the filter of our lives, but they're not the producer. But if they are the filters, how do we clean it? How do we maximize it? And so for me, I've really been focusing a lot on the body and the brain, because these are our tools that we have. And if we're able to really learn how to kick those into high gear, we could really elevate our lives to really have a clear filter, to allow the spirit to really move through the body and the brain a lot easier.
Well, and in some ways, actually, our brains can even block our ability to be spiritual. We can, our beliefs can get in the way sometimes, and because our science teaches us so much that is really not true. Scientists are quite stubborn about that. They believe, for example, that the brain generates consciousness, and it doesn't.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the material reductionism kind of thing, where you just reduce everything to its purest form. There's nothing but, but what I would say is when you really are able to really have a lot of neural behaviors and learning how to take really good care of your brain, it could really help, in terms of, For instance, there's a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with self-awareness.
Yes.
And they find meditators versus non-meditators have much more developed prefrontal cortexes than
Which
those
is
that
good.
don't, which is amazing. It means you're living in awareness. You're living, aware. And there's other parts of the brain that have to do with abstract thought and, all these things that we're talking about. So, this inner practice is not just woo. It has, over the last 10 or 20 years, there's really been tangible evidence through Harvard hard neuroscience that there's an association of spiritual practice and meditation and the impacts in our brains, and how that could really impact our everyday lives.
Which is that's very comforting and exciting to hear. I mean, hopefully science will begin to be aware of the fact that the brain doesn't generate consciousness,
Right.
but it is a kind of filter, a kind of receiver. And if they start treating it that way, perhaps we can become more effective in terms of our spiritual growth. That would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
We're coming toward the end of our time. I can't believe it's gone so fast. But what do you want people to take away from our conversation today, Jacob?
I want people to be and learn how to be comfortable with the unknown. I think, we might have spoken about this before, but our world would not be known as it is if people didn't dare to expand what they know and to explore, and so many people will just hold on to this box of what they know and they will just push away what they don't know. And I think for us to really grow, we have to make friends with the unknown. And I know in your channel, it's making this great unknown to be more known, to be more familiar. And if you're able to look at this stuff, I find looking at, fatality, much like my NDE, could really be a gateway for others to maybe develop a possibility of inviting an awareness of immortality. And I see that with people who lose loved ones, where they have this loss, but all of a sudden their grief is a gateway of maybe looking at life in a new way, and they just kind of like expand, their lives. So I think it's looking at, mortality and acknowledging that, yes, that is a part of this physical reality, and that doesn't have to be looked at with trepidation, but rather something that could lead to more purpose, but also really allowing people to really maximize their brains and their bodies and learning how to take optimal care, trying to move, trying to eat good foods, trying to take care of this vessel is very important because, all of these things makes us, human. We are just spirits in this body, but we really have to maximize this body as much as we can. And you'll find that your lives will really take a whole new gear with simple shifts of self-care and self-love. That's a part of this experience too.
This is a very brief experience, and what comes after it is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Jacob, big hug. I think you're just wonderful. What you're doing is beautiful work, and it's just begun.
We've only just begun, as the comforters would say, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Big hug, dear.
Big hugs. Thank you, Roberta. I appreciate this honored opportunity.
We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Everyone, we've come to the end of our time. This has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm so happy you could be with us today. Please never forget that you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began and you never will end. And when you really get that, it changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Brenda Rice. She'll be with us for the second time, and Brenda is the guru of forgiveness. She says self-forgiveness helped her to transition out of victimhood and into the life people really that she was meant to live and that she thinks everybody is meant to live. And now she's dedicated her life to helping people overcome obstacles that hold them back from living their own lives to the fullest. She wrote a fantastic 5-step forgiveness process book. It's really nifty. It's called Forgive Yourself. And frankly, she's the first person I have found who really gets forgiveness the way people need to get forgiveness. She's the best forgiveness expert I have ever found who really can teach it. And as you know, forgiveness is the gateway to freeing yourself to practice perfect love. Jesus taught it, and I have never found anybody who can teach it correctly, really correctly. Jesus said we should forgive 70 times 7, remember? And I'm excited to have her back because I don't teach it the way she does. I think she's terrific. And please, therefore, join us next week. This week, we've been speaking with Jacob Cooper. He's been with us for the 3rd time. Jacob has had a childhood near-death experience. They're rare, but when they happen, they shape your life. Today, Jacob is a clinical social worker, a certified Reiki master, and a certified hypnotherapist. He specializes in past life regression therapy, and he works privately with clients through online services. And because he was especially inspired by his spiritual awakening, he facilitates spiritual awareness in other people. And as you can hear, he's really kind of got it. I don't know what it is about Jacob. He lives and practices in Long Island, New York. And his second book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, features a grown-up Jacob who works as a counselor. And he's in the zone. I don't know what it is about him, but he's really, I think he's going to be, as he matures, and he's still maturing, I think he's going to be really kind of a guru for people in ways that few people really achieve. So we will have him back again. I'm interested to see what he's going to become as he grows. But I really like Jacob. I really almost identify with him as someone who's going to be a next generation teacher of people, and someone who's able to really open out and be one of the people who is leading the next generation. And of course, now it's time once again to mention that Seek Reality Online is your one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Just go to seekreality.com and start to learn for yourself that your own reality really is eternal. Learn the ultimate truth from Craig Hogan himself, who is the ultimate expert on all things afterlife. And teachingsbyjesus.com is your single resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the greatest teacher who ever lived, Master Jesus, the eternally risen Christ. Now it really is Jesus' turn. As Christianity, the religion dies, and it had to die because the real teachings of Jesus now can finally come alive. They were never in the religion at all. Teachingsbyjesus.com is the Lord's own entirely religion-free website made by him and for him in perfect love for you. As I'm sure you know by now, my own nonfiction books are Liberating Jesus, The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, The Fun of Growing Forever, The Fun of Living Together, and The Fun of Loving Jesus, Embracing the Christianity that Jesus Taught. For young children, there's The Fun of Meeting Jesus, and you can order all these books through bookstores or on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. And the adult books, all except the latest, are available as audiobooks. If you want to talk about anything, my books, or just anything at all, you can always contact me through the green contact block on RobertaGrimes.com. I answer all my emails, although I think right now I'm answering them a week late because I have so many that come in and I answer them in order. Just please be sure to give me your correct email address because on occasion they bounce. People have given me their address wrong and that makes me so sad. I hate that. So please make sure your address is right. Past episodes of Seek Reality are available just about everywhere, wherever podcasts are found. And many people just tell me they listen each week through the Seek Reality app you can find for free wherever free apps are available. Meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and make the most of this coming week in our one reality. We share one reality, even though people don't yet realize that. And it's an eternal reality. Please always know that you are a powerful, eternal being, and you in particular in this entire universe, you, most of all, are infinitely loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at RobertaGrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.